I didn't mean for it to happen. The heat between Caleb and me, the moment we crossed the line we swore we wouldn't. One touch, one look, and everything changed. But what started as something we couldn't deny soon spiraled out of control. Love turned to obsession, and in the end, the fire between us consumed everything. This is the story of how we burned. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you find it compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. When my mom married Caleb's dad, I didn't think much of it. At 16, I had enough on my plate. Soccer, school, my friends, the endless cycle of teenage chaos. The idea of a new family sounded more like an inconvenience than a blessing. But when Caleb walked through the door for the first time, carrying a box of books in his arms and avoiding eye contact like his life depended on it, I knew things were about to get interesting. Caleb was my opposite in every way. Where I thrived on attention, he shrank from it. Where I spoke my mind, he measured every word. He had this quiet way of disappearing into the background, as though he didn't want the world to notice him. At first, I thought it was shyness, but the more time we spent together, the more I realized it wasn't that simple. Caleb didn't just avoid people. He seemed to observe them, like he was always watching, always thinking. Our parents were thrilled with how well we got along. After all, we didn't fight over the TV remote, didn't bicker at the dinner table, didn't lock ourselves in separate rooms. Instead, we found common ground almost immediately. First in the little things like video games and late-night movies, and later in bigger ones like soccer and school projects. By the time summer rolled around, Caleb was more than my stepbrother. He was my best friend. "You're lucky you've got me," I teased one afternoon, kicking a soccer ball across the backyard. Caleb sat cross-legged in the grass, a book open on his lap. "Without me, you'd probably still be hiding in your room." He glanced up, smirking in that quiet way of his. "And without me, you'd fail every history test." I laughed, launching the ball his way. He yelped, narrowly dodging it, and we both dissolved into laughter. It was like that with us. Easy, natural, like we'd known each other forever instead of a few months. But it wasn't just the two of us who noticed. At family gatherings, relatives would comment on how close we'd become. "You're like real brothers already," they'd say, smiling at our inside jokes and shared glances. Our parents beamed, proud of the family they'd built. At night, when the house was quiet, Caleb and I would stay up talking. Sometimes we'd sit on the couch with a movie playing in the background, neither of us paying much attention. Other times, we'd lie on the floor of my room, staring at the ceiling, trading stories about our lives before our parents got together. I used to think this whole stepfamily thing was going to suck. I admitted one night, my voice low so we wouldn't wake anyone. "But you're not so bad." Caleb chuckled, his head resting on his arms. Same here. In those moments, I felt something I hadn't expected. Connection. Real connection. It wasn't forced or awkward or temporary. It was real and it was ours. And that was how it started. Living with Caleb started to feel like second nature, like he'd always been there. We shared nearly everything. Clothes, snacks, the occasional inside joke that no one else understood. But somewhere along the line, things shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, more like a whisper in the background than a shout. It started with little things. One night, we were watching a movie in the living room, the kind of over-the-top action flick that didn't require much thought. I stretched out on the couch and Caleb sat next to me, curled up like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. At some point, without thinking, I dropped my arm across the back of the couch, resting it just behind his shoulders. He froze for a second, then relaxed. It wasn't a big deal. I'd done the same thing with friends a million times. But the way Caleb leaned into it, just a little, made something flicker in my chest. I brushed it off, chalking it up to how much I cared about him. He was my stepbrother, my best friend. Of course I'd feel protective of him. But then there were the mornings. Caleb had this habit of falling asleep in my room after one of our late-night hangouts. I'd wake up to find him sprawled across the other side of my bed. His hair a mess, his face soft and peaceful in the early light. First it was funny. I'd nudge him awake, laughing when he mumbled something incoherent and buried his face in the pillow. But as the weeks went on, I stopped waking him up right away. I'd lie there, watching him for a moment too long, the quiet of the morning pressing down on me. It felt intimate in a way I couldn't explain, like we were the only two people in the world. I told myself it was nothing, just a stepbrother thing, just normal. But the little moments kept adding up. The way Caleb would rest his head against my shoulder when he was tired, the way my heart kicked up when his hand brushed mine during a game. I didn't want to think about what it meant, because deep down I knew. The shift in our relationship hit me like a slow, creeping tide, something I couldn't ignore anymore, no matter how much I tried. It was a Friday night, and our parents were out for the evening. Caleb and I had ordered pizza and settled into the living room, the glow of the TV casting soft shadows across the walls. We were watching some random thriller, though I couldn't focus on the plot. My attention kept drifting to Caleb, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a blanket draped over his shoulders. He looked different. Not in a big way, just little things I hadn't noticed before. The curve of his jaw when he tilted his head, the way his lashes caught the light, the way he chewed his lip when he was concentrating. My stomach twisted, and I forced myself to look away. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, glancing back at me. "Nothing," I said quickly, a little too quickly. He didn't press, but his gaze lingered for a moment before he turned back to the TV. That was the thing about Caleb, he noticed everything. And lately, I'd started noticing him in ways that didn't feel brotherly. The movie ended and we were still sitting there, the silence stretching between us. Caleb shifted closer, leaning against the couch near where I was sprawled out. His shoulder brushed my leg, and my breath caught in my throat. "I don't get why everyone freaked out about that twist," he said, breaking the quiet. "It was so obvious." I laughed, though it felt hollow. "Maybe you're just smarter than the rest of us." He rolled his eyes, but his smile was soft. "Doubt it. You've got me beat in literally everything else." Something in the way he said it made me pause. The warmth in his voice, the way he looked up at me, it was so open, so vulnerable. Without thinking, I reached out and ruffled his hair, trying to lighten the moment. "Don't sell yourself short, genius." He swatted my hand away, laughing, but the sound died out too soon. His eyes locked on mine, and for a second, the world felt impossibly still. It wasn't just me. He felt it too. That moment should have been terrifying, but it wasn't. Felt inevitable. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Couldn't sleep. The moment from earlier, that look Caleb had given me, the way my chest had tightened like I couldn't breathe, was all I could think about. I tried to push it away, to convince myself it was nothing, but the harder I tried, the stronger it stuck. A soft knock at my bedroom door pulled me from my thoughts. "Yeah," I called, sitting up. The door creaked open, and Caleb stepped inside. He looked hesitant, his hair mussed like he'd been tossing and turning. "Can't sleep," he murmured. "Join the club," I said, patting the edge of the bed. He hesitated before sitting down, his shoulders tense. "You okay?" he asked after a moment. I wanted to lie, to brush it off, but the words caught in my throat. "I don't know," I admitted. "Things feel weird lately." Caleb's gaze flicked to mine, something cautious but curious in his expression. "Weird how?" I struggled to find the words. How could I explain the way my heart sped up when he was near? Or how I couldn't stop thinking about him, even when I tried? "I don't know," I said again, quieter this time. Caleb shifted, pulling his legs up onto the bed. He sat cross-legged, his knee brushing against mine. "Is it me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My stomach twisted, the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the air between us. "It's not you," I said. "It's me. I broke off, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know what's happening to me." For a long moment, Caleb didn't say anything. Then, carefully, he reached out and rested his hand on mine. His touch was warm, grounding, and it made something inside me unravel. I've been feeling it too, he said softly. My heart stopped. Before I could think, before I could talk myself out of it, I leaned forward, closing the space between us. Our lips met, tentative and unsure, and the world seemed to fall away. When we pulled back, the air felt heavier, charged with something new. This is wrong, Caleb whispered, his voice trembling. Maybe, I said, but it feels right. Neither of us said anything after that, but we didn't need to. The silence said everything. The days after our kiss felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Everything between Caleb and me shifted, becoming something deeper, something secret. We didn't talk about it at first, not directly anyway. We didn't need to. The way Caleb's hand lingered on mine when we passed each other a plate at dinner, the way he leaned into me when we sat on the couch, the way his eyes searched for mine in a crowded room, it was enough. Our bond wasn't just growing. It was tightening, pulling us closer in ways I couldn't fully explain. But secrecy has a weight to it, and ours grew heavier every day. Late one night, Caleb slipped into my room again. He didn't knock this time, just eased the door shut behind him and crossed the room in a few quick steps. He didn't say a word as he climbed into bed beside me. "I missed you," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet. My chest tightened. I turned toward him, my hand brushing his. "You saw me all day." "That's not what I mean," he said, and his eyes, wide, searching, filled with something raw, met mine. It wasn't just affection anymore. It was a hunger, a need, something that scared me as much as it thrilled me. But with every secret moment we shared, Caleb seemed to depend on me more. He started skipping plans with his friends, staying home even when I told him to go out. I liked having him close, but a part of me wondered if it was too much. One night, after our parents had gone to bed, I found Caleb sitting on the kitchen counter, his face drawn and tired. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping closer. He hesitated, his fingers toying with the edge of his sleeve. Do you think what we're doing is okay?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "Of course it is," I said, more forcefully than I intended. I moved closer, gripping his hand. "What we have is ours. No one else gets to decide if it's okay." Caleb didn't say anything, but the way he looked at me, it was trust. Complete, unwavering trust. And that trust? It was intoxicating. But deep down, I knew it came with a cost. The family gathering was supposed to be a casual barbecue. A chance for everyone to relax, eat, and catch up. But for me, it was a test. Every smile, every handshake, every shared glance felt like a mask I had to keep in place, hiding the truth about Caleb and me. Caleb seemed fine at first, drifting between conversations with his usual quiet charm. I watched him from across the yard, a part of me buzzing with pride and something darker. Then I saw her. She was laughing at something Caleb said, leaning a little too close. He didn't pull away. If anything, he smiled back, and my chest tightened with something hot and sharp. Jealousy. It was ridiculous. She was just some girl, a cousin's friend or a neighbor, someone who didn't matter. But the way Caleb was smiling, the way he looked at her, felt wrong. I tried to shake it off, forcing myself to laugh at my uncle's bad jokes. But I couldn't stop glancing at them. Each time, that knot in my stomach tightened. By the time the sun set and everyone started to drift inside, I could barely breathe. Later, in the quiet of our room, the tension boiled over. Caleb was sitting on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone, when I closed the door behind me. "What was that about?" I snapped. He looked up, frowning. "What are you talking about?" "You and that girl," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You were all over each other." Caleb's eyes widened, and then his expression hardened. "Are you serious right now?" "I'm not blind, Caleb. I saw the way you were looking at her." He stood up, his phone forgotten on the bed. "She was just being friendly. You're the one making this weird." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "It didn't look friendly. And what if it wasn't?" He shot back, his voice rising. What do you expect me to do, Ethan? Pretend everything's fine when you're acting like this? His words hit me like a slap. I didn't answer. Couldn't. The space between us felt like it was growing wider, the trust we'd built cracking under the weight of my jealousy. And for the first time, I wondered if I was losing him. After that night, something shifted between us. Caleb wasn't as present anymore. He stopped coming to my room late at night, stopped lingering in the kitchen after dinner. He spent more time at school clubs or at friends' houses, leaving me alone in a way I hadn't been since we'd first become brothers. It was subtle at first, but I felt the distance like a physical weight. One afternoon, I found him in the backyard, lying on the grass with a book open on his chest. The sight of him there, alone, peaceful, completely detached from me, set my teeth on edge. "You've been avoiding me," I said, crossing the yard to stand over him. He didn't look up. "I've been busy." "Busy," I echoed, my voice tightening. "You barely even talk to me anymore." Caleb sighed, finally meeting my eyes. There was something distant in his gaze, something that made my chest ache. "I just needed space, Ethan. That's all." Space. The word tasted bitter. What the hell does that mean? Space from what? "You know what?" he said, his voice quiet but firm. "From us. From this." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind scrambled for a way to respond, to fix whatever was happening. "You don't mean that," I said, crouching beside him. "You can't mean that." He sat up, his book forgotten in the grass. "I don't know what I mean anymore," he admitted. "But it's too much, Ethan. I feel like I can't breathe." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So you're just going to walk away?" I demanded. "I'm not walking away," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm trying to figure out who I am outside of you. Don't you get that?" I didn't. Not really. Caleb was mine. He'd always been mine. The idea of him pulling away, of him choosing someone else, something else, was unbearable. "You don't need to figure anything out," I said, my voice low, desperate. "We're perfect the way we are. You know that." Caleb shook his head, standing and brushing grass off his jeans. "I don't know anything anymore, Ethan. And maybe that's the problem." I watched him walk away, the distance between us growing wider with every step. And for the first time, I felt like I was losing him. For real this time. I should have let Caleb go. That thought ran through my mind over and over as I stood outside the house where he was, the glow of the porch light casting long shadows on the ground. It was late, too late to be here. But I'd seen his messages pop up on our dad's phone earlier, the casual mention that he was at a friend's house. Something about it had set me off. He didn't tell me where he was going. He didn't tell me anything anymore. I knocked on the door, sharp and insistent, my chest tight with frustration. A moment later, the door swung open, revealing Caleb's friend, Mark. I thought his name was. He blinked at me, clearly surprised to see me standing there. Hey, Ethan," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Caleb's in the back." "Should I?" "I'll find him," I said, pushing past him without waiting for an answer. Mark didn't try to stop me, though I felt his eyes on my back as I headed down the hall. The sound of laughter and voices led me to the den, where Caleb sat with a group of people, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in weeks. Until he saw me. The laughter stopped abruptly as Caleb stood, his expression shifting from surprise to irritation. "Ethan," he said, walking toward me. "What are you doing here?" I ignored the stares from the others, my focus locked on him. "We need to talk. Now." "Ethan, not here," Caleb hissed, grabbing my arm and steering me toward the door. The second we were outside, I yanked my arm free and turned to face him. "What the hell are you doing?" "What am I doing?" He shot back, his voice rising. "What are you doing, showing up here like this? You're embarrassing me." "Embarrassing you?" I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "I wouldn't have to come find you if you weren't avoiding me." Caleb's face flushed with anger. "Because you don't give me a choice, Ethan. You're suffocating me." The accusation cut deep, but I refused to back down. I'm not the one who's running away. Maybe I should, Caleb shouted. His voice cracked, and for a moment I thought he might cry. Maybe I should have done it sooner. I stepped closer, too close. You don't mean that. Yes, I do, he said, his voice trembling. I can't do this anymore, Ethan. I can't. I grabbed his wrist, cutting him off. You're not leaving me? I said, my voice low and sharp. You don't get to leave me. Caleb tried to pull away, but I held on tighter, my grip fueled by a desperation I couldn't control. The world around us blurred, and in that moment, nothing else mattered but keeping him close. Let go of me, he shouted, his voice echoing in the still night. But I couldn't. I didn't. And then, the struggle turned violent, spiraling into chaos I hadn't intended, hadn't wanted. And by the time it was over, Caleb wasn't moving. I don't remember how I got home. The world felt muted, as if someone had turned down the volume on everything around me. My hands were shaking, still smeared with blood, but I couldn't bring myself to wash them. It didn't feel real, none of it did. I replayed the moment over and over in my mind, each time trying to convince myself that I could have stopped it, that I could have let go. Caleb's face, pale and still, was burned into my memory, an image I couldn't erase no matter how hard I tried. I sat on my bed, staring at the floor, the silence in the house deafening. Our parents were out, thank God. I couldn't face them, couldn't explain what I'd done. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a text from Mark. I didn't read it. I didn't have to. I knew what it would say. The guilt was a weight on my chest, crushing and unrelenting. Caleb's voice echoed in my mind, his last words sharp and full of pain. I pushed too hard, held on too tight, and now there was nothing left. I reached for the bottle of pills on my nightstand, my hands trembling as I unscrewed the cap. The thought of continuing without him, of living in a world where Caleb wasn't, was unbearable. The first pill slipped past my lips, then the second. By the time I felt the heaviness creep over me, pulling me into darkness, the tears finally came. I whispered his name one last time before everything faded to black. The news broke the next morning, spreading through the community like wildfire. 2 lives lost in a single night. Stepbrothers, best friends, and, as people would later speculate, something more. The police found me in my room, unresponsive but still alive, though only barely. By the time I woke in the hospital, the weight of what I'd done crushed me before I even opened my eyes. Caleb was gone. The house was a tomb after that. Our parents couldn't bring themselves to speak of it, the echoes of their grief filling every silent corner. Caleb's room remained untouched, frozen in time, his books still scattered on the desk, his clothes still hanging in the closet. People whispered about us. At school, in the neighborhood, even in the family. Some said they'd seen how close we were, that they'd always thought something was different. Others dismissed it, clinging to the idea that we were just stepbrothers caught in a tragic accident. But the truth stayed locked inside me. I didn't tell anyone about the kiss, the late-night whispers, or the suffocating need that drove us apart. Those moments belonged to us, no matter how twisted or wrong they might have seemed. They were ours, and no one else could understand. Months later, a small memorial was held in the park where Caleb and I used to play soccer. His name was carved into a plaque beside a tree, a reminder of the boy he had been, the quiet observer, the reserved thinker, the person who'd seen me in ways no one else ever could. I stood there for hours after everyone had left, staring at his name, the weight of everything we'd been pressing down on me. Caleb had always been mine, and in the end that was what destroyed us.